Good evening and welcome to tonight's recovery story. So my name is actually Edward Taylor. I'm the prevention program coordinator at the Addiction Prevention Coalition. I don't have a Zoom license anymore, so I have to use my boss's. So Carrie Wimberly is her name, just so you know. But I'd like to welcome Nathaniel Robinson, who will be sharing his recovery story with us tonight. How you been doing, Nathaniel? It's been a little while since I've seen you.
Yeah, things are good. I'm actually back home for the holidays now. So
Oh, back in Cleveland,
Columbus, yeah, Ohio.
Columbus.
Yep.
That's right.
So looking forward to some time off and time with family.
Nice. When did you get up there?
Sunday night.
Sunday night.
Mhm.
Awesome. How long are you gonna be back up there for?
I'm coming back to Birmingham on the 30th. So
Okay.
pretty decent trip. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Good for you. So I have to say, this will be bragging on Nathaniel a little bit, but he's a great example of why the APC does such a great job. Nathaniel actually reached out to us looking for volunteer opportunities. Nobody forced him, nobody asked him. And that's not to say, of course, that our volunteers are usually that way. But, you know, the APC has so many outstanding volunteers. And I know for a fact that our impact in the community would be significantly less or lesser without volunteers like Nathaniel. So we definitely appreciate him. So after he reached out, I met with him. We had some really good coffee. I forget the name of that place. It was in 5 Point, I think
Panache, yeah.
Nash, yeah. I'm a big coffee guy. I just finished off a delicious cup, and I had never been there, so I was really excited to try it out. It was really good. But you know, I'm in recovery too, so I love meeting with folks, hearing their stories and all that good stuff. And you know, one thing that stood out, and I already warned Nathaniel that I would be asking him probably more questions about this than the rest, is he's involved with some really fascinating research at UAB. So I mean, obviously you'll have plenty of time to tell us about that, Nathaniel, but can you go ahead and give everybody kind of a sampler of what kind of research you do?
Yeah. So our lab, I'm in the Department of Neurobiology at UAB, and our lab studies sort of how rewarding experiences act on the brain. And that can be any type of reward. I mean, there's all types of rewards, for humans, for example, sugary foods, money, and drugs of abuse. And a lot of them feed through the same kind of brain pathways, but they act in slightly different manners, kind of if you take a deep dive and look at the very small kind of molecular level. And so our lab focuses on trying to understand the molecular mechanisms that are unique to drugs of abuse that make them so rewarding, basically. And when they start becoming too rewarding, then that progresses to sort of compulsive drug taking and substance use disorders. So
Mm-hmm.
we always have an eye on the clinical implications of what we're doing, even though we're not clinicians and we don't work directly with patients or anything. But we think about how what we're doing can hopefully impact people dealing with these diseases.
Yeah, definitely. That's, you know, without being, obviously, I'm not an expert on any of that other than being a being a person in recovery and a recovering heroin addict. So I know about the actual experience. But you know, there's definitely, most folks know, you know, that dopamine and the heightened or the increased reward or release of dopamine with, say, heroin or meth or anything like that. Most folks know about that, but there's obviously much more to it. And you know, it's really cool that y'all are working on that, and eventually we'll be able to see some results and how that can help people. So, but we'll go back a little bit. Let me make sure. I guess nothing's in the chat. Got a few attendees. So, and by the way, everyone who's on here, if you have any questions, just put them in the chat box, and we'll definitely, if we see any, we'll get to those at the end. But anyways, let's kind of go back to the beginning, Nathaniel, wherever you're comfortable with starting, and kind of tell us your story of addiction and life and recovery and all that stuff.
Sure. So I started, my drug of choice was stimulants, so amphetamines, prescription amphetamines, and methamphetamine. I used, I would say I had a true substance use disorder for most of high school, is kind of when this was happening. I started using when I was 15, and the last time I used amphetamines was 2009. So around the time I went to college. Fortunately, well, not fortunately, through a lot of hard work and great support and good treatment, I have not used amphetamine since then. I did relapse once with prescription opiates when I was in graduate school. But to get a little deeper into kind of the origins, at the time I guess was looking for something to make me feel better. At that time I was dealing with what I now know was major depression, something I still deal with, but at that time I really had no insight about mental illness or
Right.
knowledge about mental illness. I was very ignorant of all that. I sort of had this view that a lot of people battle with or still hold, that it was something was wrong with me. This was a character flaw. This was something that I could get through on my own without anybody's help, through kind of sheer willpower. I just didn't understand all the science and how people view these things as diseases, and didn't have a good vocabulary for even kind of articulating how I was feeling.
You're supposed to just shake it off. That's all. Just shake it off.
Yeah, and that was proving
great advice.
Yeah, that was proving to be increasingly difficult. And in parallel with that, I was always a very good student. The expectations for me academically from myself and from others were very high. And as my depressive symptoms grew worse, and I wasn't dealing with them really in any healthy way, I looked for ways to sort of, I wasn't interested in things. I didn't have much energy. My focus was off and things like that. And I sort of developed some disordered eating, and I said, well, how can I have to do well in school, and I have to meet everybody's expectations, and I have to meet my own expectations. What magic bullet can I use to make that all happen? And to kind of push through or suppress, all these feelings I was dealing with. And I found that a convenient answer, or what I thought was a convenient and sort of very kind of all-encompassing way to do that, was to start taking amphetamines. So, I found, I guess through a combination of my own looking into it and talking to my peers and stuff, because kids that age, or college age kids and stuff, a lot of times to cram for an exam or something like that, will use Ritalin. People have prescriptions that they sell and stuff like that. So it was not hard to get from somebody at my school. I tried it. It really didn't have any effect at first. So then right away, I started escalating the amount I was taking, because I really wasn't seeing any effect at all until I got to the point. It was a very small window. And once I crossed over that kind of threshold, it had kind of all the effects I was, I guess, desiring, which was I had way more energy. My appetite was suppressed, and I just was more bubbly, I suppose. But it also had the euphoric effects. It made me feel good. And I did, for most of my life, I hadn't ever felt good. And that, I just didn't, that was so almost overwhelming. Because I was like you said, all that dopamine and serotonin that get released. And it's just like that first high. I'm sure I know you can relate. I'm sure a lot of people listening can probably relate. There's just no even way to even describe it, other than it was just an incredible, just purely good feeling.
Yeah. I mean, the best way, because you're right. I mean, anybody who hasn't had that experience, it's really difficult to explain it or describe it accurately to them. I for a while my strategy was explaining, the certain like regular dopamine releases for stuff like sleeping, eating, having sex, and then all basically, like, I think having sex or something was like the highest one naturally, and then you skip like all the way up, and you have like IV drugs.
Yeah.
I was an user myself, and it's like, or not even that, even other drugs, it's like 1,000 times more. But when that doesn't get through, what I do is I say, basically, because my experience was just like yours, it was just with opiates. So like I finally, all my insecurities and anxiety melted away, and on top of that, I felt the best I'd ever felt in my life. Like it felt like I suddenly was getting something about the world that everyone else had been getting all along. Like it was the last missing piece of the puzzle. Those are my best attempts to describe it, but it's, it's intense. It's
Yeah.
a spiritual experience, just in the wrong way.
Yeah. Like describing it as capturing something that other people seem to have naturally is a great way to put it, because that's
Mhm.
exactly how I felt. And that's kind of what I was looking for too, because everyone else seemed to, this is so strange to say about a high school student, because nobody in high school has their stuff together, but it just seemed to me that everybody had all their stuff together and everybody was happy and stuff like that. And I was chasing that high of sorts, in addition to like the true high I got from the drugs. And so from there, um, I was like, great, this magic bullet did exactly what I wanted. And then I rode the slippery slope from there. My usage escalated, and it went from, the best way I can describe it, I think, is, I sought out drugs initially because I was suffering. I was in emotional pain and I wanted something to alleviate that. Then I got the high. I got that great
Yeah.
feeling. I was chasing that. Well, that goes away, as we all know. We develop tolerance, and then it becomes, you're taking more and more drugs just to overcome withdrawal and to stave off pain. I mean, it becomes less about it feeling good and all about not feeling bad.
Mhm.
So I got to that point where the amount I was taking escalated. As I said, I switched from prescription amphetamines first to oral methamphetamine, and then eventually to injection methamphetamine, just to get that more intense feeling. And to it's just like, well, okay, well, this is what my body needs right now, so I'm trying to give it to it in stronger and higher and more frequent doses. And of course, that just makes the higher the highs, the lower the lows, right? I mean, I would
Mhm.
just crash, I would withdraw, and somehow, well, to whatever extent it did give me more energy in the like immediate term, after I would take it or whatever,
Mhm.
all that energy went to my studies. So I was still able to remain a pretty good student, but
Mhm.
basically every other aspect of my life suffered. My
Mhm.
relationships became very volatile. I wouldn't eat for days at a time. I really didn't care about taking care of myself in any way. I was still dealing with an undiagnosed mental illness, I guess now multiple undiagnosed mental illnesses. And it wasn't, I was feeling progressively worse and worse, not just from withdrawing and or through the actions of taking more and more drugs, but also, that my depression would kind of ride that roller coaster as well. And it all became tangled up with each other and stuff. So it was, I felt by the time my usage was at its highest and I started seeking treatment eventually, I felt very isolated. I knew really at that point the drug was basically never making me feel good. So, I was only taking it because my body told me I needed to,
Yeah.
right? Again, it was to not feel bad.
Mhm.
Um,
Did you
so
have, sorry, I didn't mean to
no,
interrupt.
please, please.
I was just thinking about, um, I basically started using to self-medicate, mental illness on my end. Mine was already diagnosed, but I always love the irony of this. I hated taking medicine. uh, so I would take like the bare minimum. I really wasn't willing to like adjust my medication anyway. I was rarely super honest with the doctor when I would go. I'd just say like, yeah, it's, you know, it's fine. It's not any worse, not much better. Um, so I would self-medicate, and I found my mental illness. I mean, I'm speaking in particular of generalized anxiety disorder. It's so interesting. It actually got worse the more and more that I used, for various reasons, whether it was anxiety about getting caught, anxiety about where am I going to get my next fix, anxiety about, you know, how am I going to get the money for that, and to the point where I was having that was kind of manifesting itself, that heightened anxiety in like different physical ailments, like severe, like go to the ER migraines, like call the, you know, severe migraines, rashes, you know, the weight loss, that was more just, that happens almost always with using opiates, but it's so interesting, and if not a migraine, then just constant headaches. And so it's so, you know, I don't know if you did you have any experiences where your mental illness was actually worsened in the long
Yeah,
run
yeah,
with use?
definitely. Because really what I think happened was eventually I stopped getting any euphoric effects from the drugs really. So they
Yeah,
wouldn't really counteract whatever baseline, I guess if you want to call it that, baseline depression I had.
yeah,
And then
yeah,
when I would feel terrible after I'd crash, then I would just feel worse, you know, it
yeah,
was depression plus that. It was just like a keep continually sinking to a new low, basically. So
yeah.
it absolutely, whatever course my depression was on at that point, it absolutely, I think, accelerated it or made it worse.
Yeah, it's a vicious cycle for sure. I mean, you you use to treat whatever mental illness there is, or self-medicate, and it makes it temporarily better, mostly, if not way better. But it slowly but surely over time, because I was thinking when you know, you mentioned depression and stimulants, and I started thinking, God, the detox process off of that already is like depression or similar to depression.
Yeah,
So if you already have depression, wow.
yeah, it was pretty gnarly at its worst. And yeah, it's the, you know, it's just self-medication doesn't work. I think we
No,
can
no,
safely say that, but it's not, it's not to say that I was necessarily even equipped to do anything differently. Now, of
yeah,
course, I could have, articulated to someone how I felt, and that certainly would have helped. But like I said, because sort of I was so ignorant about mental health. It's not something my family really ever talked about. In fact, I have somewhat of a family history of mental illness, but I have a strong family history of people kind of like repressing, talking about their feelings.
yeah,
And so I grew up in that environment and did the same thing. And so it's not to say that if someone starts self-medicating that they're a screw up, or they're bad or something like that. It's all based on the context of how they were raised and where they're living and their environmental circumstances, I think, too.
yeah, yeah. I mean, self-medicating is, first of all, you know, it's obviously it's a cry for help, but also, I mean, I did it at work the first time. You know what I mean? Like, it makes perfect sense if somebody
Mhm.
does that, and it seems like it works better than anything else they've ever tried, even if they haven't tried much. It makes sense, but yeah, it's not a sustainable, you know, treatment course of any kind.
Mhm.
But go on, and because I I want to make sure I dig us out of the addiction hole and get us to the
Mhm.
recovery hole.
Yeah. So, I first ended up getting treatment for depression before I would say I per se got treatment for my substance use disorder. I
Okay.
was actually hospitalized. That's how I got connected for treat. That's how I got a diagnosis. First of all, I was in an inpatient psych unit, and I got diagnosed. That's the first time I'd ever heard the term major depression. That's the first time I'd ever heard about antidepressants, ever been taught, had a discussion about getting connected with a therapist. So when I was discharged, I was set up with those things. I was put on a prescription for an antidepressant. I was connected with a therapist. I was very fortunate that my therapist specialized in sort of adolescents and young adults.
Mm,
Um, so he um, he was, I mean, like, I think it could have, I was very, I was very fortunate. I don't want to say that as if to say like, you know, I think most therapists out there are highly qualified to deal with these
Mhm.
issues. So I don't want to say that like it was a needle in a haystack and I happened to get that needle, because that's definitely not the case. Um, so, I was on a treatment plan for depression. At that point, I was so physically dependent on the drugs that it was, and I would say I wasn't ready to, maybe ready to admit that, or at least I just, even if I could talk about it, it was just hard physically to
Yeah.
feel like I could get to the point where I wasn't using them. So my drug use continued after that, and really that compromised my depression treatment to
Yeah.
some extent.
Yeah.
So it got to the, as I sort of described, it got to the point where at the lowest, when I was withdrawing and my depression, wasn't well managed yet, or I was having a bad day or whatever, things could get really bad.
Yeah.
And I basically just got to such a point where I was like, this isn't sustainable, because I knew I didn't want to wind up back in a hospital.
Mhm.
I saw the effect that had on my family and the people that cared about me. I knew I didn't want to subject them to that again. And so I, were at that point, I try, I was open-minded to try different things, treatment approaches for dealing with my substance use disorder. What really ended up helping me a lot, and in general, I've tried individual therapy for depression and for addiction. I've tried group therapy in various forms, even like intensive outpatient programs and things like that. I do best in a one-on-one setting
Mhm.
personally. So I worked very closely with my therapist. We developed a plan that was targeted. It sort of managed both things that were going on with me, and those were
Mhm.
interconnected, but they were also just, they had distinct features. So I started seeing him more frequently, and he gave me more. I did a lot of what's called cognitive behavioral therapy with him, for those that are familiar with that, and that is sort of a, I don't want to say academic approach to mental illness, but it's, if you contrast it with, say, psychoanalysis, where you talk a lot about what happened to you as a kid and your experiences and stuff like that. This is a little more about learning the vocabulary that I didn't have.
Mhm.
So I also found that extremely helpful, and I was able to better articulate how I was feeling. I was better able to recognize when I was engaging in self-destructive thought patterns, or tempted to engage in self-destructive behaviors. So it was several years of pretty intensive cognitive behavioral therapy that was the foundation of my treatment approach. And then, I sort of coupled that with identifying, I guess, what I would call my core support network,
Mhm.
and being very open and honest with them about, here's how I've been struggling, here's why I've been struggling, here's what I need from you. Seeing who was on board, which, pretty much everybody was, and they care about me. And so, it was really those two things um, that got me on the road to recovery.
Great. Awesome. So did you, when you decided to stop, or let me rephrase that, when you decided it was time to make a big change as far as your consumption, like your use of meth, because it was at that point at the end it was just meth. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
correct.
Okay. Um, when you made that decision, did you uh, go through like a detox program, or was it straight to like outpatient type, or individual, just purely individual
I
therapy?
never did like an inpatient detox type situation. We were able to manage we were basically able to do sort of a medically managed withdrawal, I guess you'd say.
Mhm.
I'd been on that, in the valley of withdrawal, so many times that I knew it'd be hard, but also like I feel like I was equipped to deal with it, like push
Mhm.
through it because of those experiences. Because the real difference wasn't so much that this withdrawal was any worse than any of the others necessarily. It was that now everybody else, the light had been shown on what was going on. Everybody else was in the loop, so they could be
Mhm.
there to support me, when I felt,
Accountability and
yeah, exactly. So it's like if I was tempted to, use drugs to stave off the withdrawal, then people would say, that's not the way. So that was the real difference, I think.
Okay. So as far as, because you've been clean and sober for a long time, are those two, because you mentioned the CBT and the support network kind of being your foundation. Have you added anything on to that foundation, or are those two still working for you really well?
I would say the other big thing that's helped, honestly, is that my depression is much better managed now.
Yeah.
So that's been through a combination of several different therapy modalities, including CBT, but others as well, and then medication as well,
Mhm.
antidepressant medication. So that was, I would say at the time where I laid that foundation for my addiction, my even though I've been in treatment for depression for a couple of years, we were still kind of figuring a lot of things out, especially with the
Mhm.
medication.
Yeah.
So that needed some more time to progress to the point where I could have a stable treatment plan for that. So I would say if anything's changed, it's just that's gotten a lot stronger over the years.
Yeah. It does take time with meds. And I'm the medication part. I'm sitting here thinking about. I can't remember exactly when this year. I know my doctor prescribed a medication to me back in like I want to say maybe August. And again, that weird part of me that's like, I hate medicine, I'm not going to take it. I didn't take it um, because I heard him say, I thought I heard him describe it as, if you want to, you can take it. It wasn't a narcotic or anything.
Mm.
It's so funny. I saw him again like a month or two later for a different issue, and he was like, "Have you started that medicine?" And I was like, "No." And he goes, "Well, that was dumb. Why didn't you start?" He's in recovery.
Yeah.
And he's in recovery, which I would highly recommend for anybody who's in recovery to try and find a doctor, a general doctor that is. If not, other doctors are competent too. But, I have that relationship with him. And he's like, "I was dumb. Why didn't you do that?" And he said, I prescribed that one to you particularly for a reason, a specific reason. So wouldn't you know it, like the next day I started the medicine and I was like, wow, this is this is much better. But let's see. But I mean, obviously, are there any other uh, like service type work? I mean, obviously, you're doing that with us. Are there any other organizations or things that you do as far as giving back or being of service to folks?
Well, so over the years, I mean, once I really got not just clean and sober, but just mentally healthier,
Mhm.
and I felt like I had some dominion over my illnesses, then my mission automatically became helping others who were going
Yeah.
through the same thing. So I've over the last 8 to 10 years especially, I've tried to engage in a lot of community efforts that are mental health focused, or spearhead if there's something lacking.
Hmm.
I did it while I was a graduate student. Graduate student mental health is actually extremely poor. Um, in fact, there's at least one study that indicates it's, in terms of the incidence of diagnosable mental illness, is actually on par with the incarcerated population in this country.
Wow.
Um,
I did not know that.
but most at least like large academic centers offer something in the way of student health
Mhm.
services. So it's not that there's nothing, but it's about, one, connecting students to those resources, because a lot of times they may not be well advertised, or they may not be at hours that are convenient for students, or through a medium that students are amenable to, or whatever. But also, once we see what's there and we connect people to what's there, then we say, okay, now what's missing, and we try and fill in the
Mhm.
gaps. So I tried to do, I tried to, you know kind of be involved with some of those efforts when I was a student. I'm doing some work, as with APC with
Mhm.
regard to a couple local colleges, and trying to do similar types of work. I've
Mhm.
also recently gotten involved with the Birmingham Crisis Center. So doing response for, I mean, they offer a lot of services there.
Okay.
My particular focus is on so being an advocate and supporting people, mostly women, who have been victims of sexual violence, and just being with them when they come in for their exam, talk about the process with them. That's something that's new to me in terms of mental health services. I haven't worked specifically with that group of people before, so I think it'll be very eye-opening.
Yeah.
And I'm very excited to see, similarly, like, okay, what's here, how can I help with the existing structure, but also, like, are there things we can do to make this better?
Yeah, that's awesome.
And not to
Awesome.
mention, as you alluded to, the research I'm doing as well, I consider a public service as well. It's not
Yeah.
just fulfilling my academic interests.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I worked in I guess you would call it the crisis center, at a treatment center before working at the APC. And I just was thinking about how some of the true, well, all of the calls were crisis calls, but the more intense ones, those were always, well, at first they were very intimidating. Hearing someone in true crisis mode on the other side of the phone, there's a tendency to like freeze or just kind of not really know what to do and just
Yeah,
say
or get triggered.
every,
I mean, that could
or
be triggering too.
yeah,
Oh, for
triggered.
sure.
But eventually, anyone who does it and sticks with it finds their style, and eventually, those calls, even though they never get super easy, those hard ones are always super rewarding. So I was just thinking about those situations you just mentioned at the crisis center. Excuse me. Those have to be, you see somebody come in that situation, and you obviously, first and foremost, you're heartbroken.
Yeah.
And then secondly, you immediately start thinking of, how am I going to help this person? And you see that
Right.
it might be in a certain state, and it could be chaotic, but those are always, super rewarding. But I was going to say, regarding your research, because we're still doing pretty good on time. Did you start, I remember us talking about it. Is this the same kind of research that you're doing? Is it a continuation of what you were doing in grad school, or is it slightly different?
So it's actually pretty different from what I did in graduate school. So I always knew that this was the research area I wanted to enter, studying the biology of mental illness. Um, but two factors, I guess, sort of diverted that a little bit in graduate school. One is that the place where I went to graduate school had a reasonably strong, what I would call, a neuroscience program, but not a lot of labs focused on psychiatric disease. So a lot of those research opportunities just weren't available to me, because I had also picked that place because at the time I was doing medical training as well, and I picked that institution in part based on the medical training I would get there. So that's one factor. And then the second factor is that 6 months before I started graduate school, my mother was diagnosed with breast cancer. And so and cancer research is not ever something, I didn't have any experience with it up to that point. It's not something I'd really thought much about engaging in, but that really changed everything. My dad also had cancer, actually. He had leukemia. And so I was just very motivated to, I said, I have a unique opportunity here where if I study, if I go into neuroscience, do neuroscience training at this place, I may not really get the training I'm looking for, or there's a very strong cancer program here, particularly breast cancer. There's a lot of great labs doing a lot of great work. I have, this sort of time limited experience where I'm a graduate student. I'll do this for 5 years. I'll gain skills that are transferable to other research areas, and then I'll really take a deep dive into what I'm most passionate about. So that's what I did. So I studied breast cancer as a graduate student.
Gotcha. So and how long have you been, you're a postdoctoral fellow right now, correct?
Yep.
So is this a continuation of your PhD studies, or is it, go ahead.
So it's so I've already earned my PhD. So this is sort of the last phase of training before I would apply for like a faculty position if I want to stay in academia to run my own lab. So it's still training, but it's both scientifically and sort of administratively distinct from my PhD.
Okay, gotcha. Gotcha. Yeah, I'm ashamed to get that confused. My best friend is finishing up his PhD, and he's trying to figure out what he's going to do next. And he's mentioned the postdoctoral fellow. I thought I knew
It's a
how
long,
it
it's a
worked.
long road, and it can all blend together pretty easily, I can tell you. So
Yeah, yeah. So, and another thing that you just, well, you kind of mentioned this here and there, but when you're talking specifically about what you're helping us with, which is, and what you've already done and what you're going to be helping us with, which is mental health services, or resource and connection, and then obviously substance use prevention stuff for colleges. I think back to my experience, at Auburn, which is where I got my bachelor's. That's when my addiction really took off, or when and where my addiction really took off. And thankfully Auburn, it seemed like, well, first of all, I mean, everything they did was great for me, but they had the student therapist and counselor set up, and I stepped right in. They were very discreet and actually the guy was really good. I think he was technically like a student or something, like getting his master's, but he was really good.
Yeah, I've actually seen several student therapists like when I was a student, and I agree. I always thought they were awesome.
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
it's because they could, they were closer to where we were at in life, so they could relate.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then when I did actually have to leave for treatment, I thought, when I would tell the health people department, whatever you call it, at the school, what was going on, that they would kick me out or put me on probation or something, and I remember my mom saying, like, they're not going to do that, and I was like, all right. And then it was no questions asked. They just said, you got it, go do what you got to do. You got a medical withdrawal, no punishment, no probation, no nothing. Get yourself better. Let us know how we can help and come back. If that's going to be part of your life after this, is come back and finish up your degree, which I was like, wow, that's awesome. But I still think that every college, not just Auburn, there's probably plenty of room for improvement as far as maybe stigma, stigma goes hand in hand with just people feeling comfortable talking about their mental health struggles and challenges, and not even necessarily like a diagnosable illness or disorder, but just general struggles like stress with exams, or because you never know, somebody could have a super high level of expectations for themselves, kind of similar to what you were talking about, and so does their family or their friends or their spouse or whatever. And maybe there's one night they just can't deal with it, and they try some sort of addictive substance for the first time to relieve it, and boom, they might have that experience that you and I talked about at the beginning, which is they finally feel like all the problems they've ever had are gone, and all that stuff. So, leading the charge on opening up those dialogues on campuses, we're going to start local, of course, but hopefully this is a trend that spreads throughout the country. Maybe it already is. Honestly, I don't know. I don't really keep my finger on that pulse very much, but I just know my experience was they were very accommodating, very helpful, supportive, but it seemed like among the student body, at least, I certainly was not comfortable going to any of my peers and be like, hey man, I just made something up. I was like, I'm having surgery, I gotta whatever, move home or something. So
yeah, I think in my experience, both as a student and sort of connecting with students, that things are improving, Now, I have a biased sample size because I really mostly work with students
Yeah.
where I'm at. But I think people, stigma absolutely still exists. There's no question about that. And it still has real world consequences.
Mhm.
But I think especially people in our generation are more comfortable just talking about their own experiences and listening to other people's experiences, because those things are different, right? You can be comfortable with
Yeah.
one and not the other,
Mhm.
because in one you're just talking about yourself, and or I shouldn't say just, in one you're talking about yourself, in one you are in a position where you kind of have to respond to something pretty
Mhm.
heavy that somebody's giving you.
Yeah.
And I think those are getting better, and I think really what I hope to be a part of, I know what everyone at APC hopes to be a part of, is not just improving those things on an individual level, but really trying to contribute to systems level change.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the
y-
ultimate goal.
Yeah. I mean, I know we do a lot of stuff, in like middle schools and mostly high schools, but
Hmm.
a lot of it is making sure every program that we're implementing has, one of one of the values is to make sure people are comfortable opening up about whatever their struggles are, um, and removing any sort of stigma, which I've encountered some with some students, but it's usually, the responses are usually pretty good. Now that could be because the kids are voluntarily there, so it's something they're already interested in.
Hmm.
But I think back to like the time that I was in school, it would have been a different story. So, and then obviously the stuff you're helping us with in colleges, that's kind of a new-ish territory for us. I mean, we did mental health happy hours with Jeff State. Those went extremely well. The students, the response from the students was overwhelmingly positive. The survey needs, beforehand were, I should say, just overwhelming. How badly it was obvious. These things were needed.
Hmm.
And Jeff State, like, it wasn't an indictment of them. Like they were growing in that area too. But anyways, let me see if there's any. We don't have any questions right now. I do think any of the attendees, if y'all have any questions, you can go ahead and put them in the chat box. But I did want to mention one thing, and that is, um, my, yeah, I'm thinking about and comparing and contrasting our recovery experiences. I shouldn't say compare because I don't, we try not to compare ourselves. But anyways, my point is, your path through recovery was different than mine. No better, no worse, just different. And one of my kind of like I guess you would say personal values in recovery is that, yes, what I did was this certain path. That is what worked for me. That is all I can attest to. I can't sit there and say that something else is or isn't going to work for somebody else. That's preposterous, honestly. I can say that, like, the stuff that worked for me probably will work for you if I'm a recovering heroin addict. So if somebody else comes to me for help and they're a recovering heroin addict, I can be like, yeah, I mean, the stuff that worked for me, probably good chance it'll help you, but I don't know for sure. If somebody wants me to be their sponsor in the 12-step fellowship that I go to, and they don't like it, that's fine. I just want to help them, so whatever it is. And, that's one of our, at the APC, we just want to help people in their recovery, get to recovery, avoid recovery. But for folks that are in recovery, like it's there is no favoritism as far as a method goes for getting into recovery and then sustaining it. That's it's different for every single person.
Hmm.
Um, so let's see if we have We don't have anything in the chat box. Did you have anything that you wanted to add, Nathaniel?
I think, because I don't know who among the attendees or whoever might hear this later on might be someone actively battling addiction versus living in long-term recovery already versus a loved one of someone who is at one of those stages. So I would say, as a little kind of to echo to what you said, as someone living through that experience firsthand, as someone who's dealing with addiction or living in recovery, getting help is the start of a journey. It's not, I mean, it obviously, it hopefully ideally grows to the solution, but it's a journey. And I think that while there are, to some extent, you can say things that are pretty universally true, like, for example, if someone's struggling with that, saying find someone you can talk to about this. I think that works for everybody.
Yeah.
But it's not to say that the person I talk to in my life, like a parent or a best friend or whatever, is going to be the right person for somebody else. So I think for those who are supporting people through that journey, to say, to always, or I should, to be willing to be that person for somebody, and to listen more than you talk, not just about what they're going through, but also what their needs are. Because even if they may not need you in that moment, they may not need you to, hear them vent or whatever, or that they may say something that they need that how to connect them to, or someone who knows someone how to connect them to, or whatever. So you can still be a vessel for helping someone, even if it's very easy, I think, for people in that position to feel powerless, because this disease may be ravaging someone that they care deeply about. And my best advice I can give, or whatever, if you consider this wisdom, is you're never powerless, but also you cannot cure this disease single-handedly. It's important to acknowledge both of those things, because there is always something you can be doing, even if it's just sitting, listening, and saying nothing. But also, you cannot do everything, because one, these diseases are complex. They take they take up to a lifetime to recover from. And also, the person going through it, your loved one, has to be at a point where they have enough insight to admit there's a problem, and to feel like they had the agency to do what they need to do as a part of that recovery as well. So just being willing to be a facilitator, but giving yourself some space and grace to say, I can't do this for them single-handedly either, I think are equally important things to acknowledge when you're going through that.
Yes, that's perfect. That's what a great ending. I feel like I shouldn't stain that with any of my commentary, but I will definitely reiterate that. I would say to anyone who's listening who might be in active addiction, or anyone who watches this at any point, both Nathaniel and I are here living, breathing examples of, like, we struggled the same way that you did, and we're on the other side of it now. That's not a matter of boasting or ego on our parts.
We're not any better or different from
I mean, speaking for myself only, like, I've taken some action, sure, but I'm not an island. And I don't take credit for much of anything as far as my recovery goes. But the other thing I would say is even for folks who are in recovery and they're kind of in a slump, because I was at a meeting last night and saw an old friend that was in one of those. And, I would say my experience has been with those, because God knows I've had several of them, and you just have to kind of ride it out, get through it, with any healthy coping mechanisms that you have, not substance related, not process addictions or anything like that. But the pot of gold at the end of the path, or whatever you want to call it, is you'll be stronger for it on the other side. And then you will have that confidence to know that, like, hey, when this happens in the future, I'll be fine. And then, as far as a message for, because I have lots of addiction in my bloodline, and my message for that would be very similar, probably not quite as elegant as the way that you worded it, but it is sometimes the best that I'm able to do, and the best that I should do, is to be quiet and be present. And on top of that, sometimes not even that, sometimes the best that I should do is not involve myself with, the active addiction stuff, but just be an example of recovery, and I don't mean that as like in the standard way, but what I mean is like showing them that it's possible, so like, cause I remember specifically one time, I was dope sick on the couch, and this guy showed up to where I was staying. I was staying at my parents' house at the time. I had convinced them that I wasn't in active addiction. I don't know how I did that, but I just said I had a stomach bug. And this guy showed up to meet my dad to go fishing, and he was in recovery, and he knew immediately what was going on. But I just remember like seeing him, and he just kind of had this look in his eye, like he didn't say anything. He didn't make a big fuss. He didn't tell my dad like, hey, your kid's obviously in withdrawals. He just said hello and had a kind of a twinkle in his eye. And surely I don't remember, but I'm sure he relayed the message to my dad that if I wanted anyone to talk to, then I had him. And that was it. That's all he did. That's perfectly fine. That tactic is not only perfectly fine, it's might be best for some people, to let them know that you're there for them when they're ready, So, all right. We don't have anything in the chat. Nathaniel, I really appreciate you coming on here, man. And obviously everyone at the APC is super appreciative of all the stuff you're getting involved with us in, and there's going to be a lot of good stuff in the future.
Yeah, well, I'm equally grateful.
Looking forward to it.
This is I would say the most public forum that I've discussed this in. And I'm fortunate to have that opportunity. I hope that it helps somebody out there. And yeah, I'm always blown away by the breadth and quality, like amazing work that APC is doing. So I'm excited to be a part of it.
Yes. Awesome. Well, I appreciate that. All right, folks. Thank you all for showing up. This was recorded at some point. I'm not sure when. It'll be on somewhere on our website. Don't worry, Nathaniel, it won't be posted on the front or anything, but this will be accessible to y'all in the future if you want to play it for someone. And of course you can, I'm actually glad I'm talking. I'm going to put my email in the chat box. If you want to reach out to us for any reason, please reach out to me. If you want to get in touch with Nathaniel, we can make that happen. No problem. Take a look at our website, take a look at the stuff that we do. Y'all are probably already familiar with that if you knew about this. But also the holidays are coming up. So, for folks in recovery, there's no telling what can happen. So just, be supportive of your loved ones if they are the ones going through the holidays in recovery. If it's you yourself, don't be afraid to maintain your boundaries. Don't be afraid to indulge in some self-care if it's just too much and you got to go take a bath or go for a walk or whatever. But we appreciate y'all, and hope you all have a happy holidays.
Yeah, thank you all so much.
Thank you, buddy.
Yep, absolutely.